Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Zenway podcast. I'm your host Zenway. In this podcast, I like to talk about life, career, and tech. For those of you who just jump in, I spent the last decade at the intersection of tech and also social sciences. And today we have a really special guest. Her name is Lizzie. I really want to thank her for coming on the show. What we are going to talk about in this episode is really Lizzie's journey around how she started her home marketing agency. After just graduating. I think even before graduating, she's already on this entrepreneurial journey. Studying psychology as a major. So before we dive deep into the different kind of conversations or questions that we have, I'm just gonna pass the time over to Lizzie and introduce herself really quickly. Lizzie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. So just a quick round of introduction. So my name is Lizzie, and I basically run a marketing agency called WECT. So I co-founded it with my partner. So basically what we do with this agency is we help founders do storytelling. So basically, we help them to share their stories about their business, about their experiences, their challenges and failures as well, to help them to build a community on LinkedIn.
Yeah. That's really interesting because I think you mentioned a few things there, right? Stories, failures, and also talking about trying different ways to create an audience. I think that's exactly kind of what I'm trying to do as well. And I felt like you have a lot of stories to share. I think as a young person, I can't remember what I was doing when I was your age. Definitely not starting a business, right? So maybe we could start a little bit about why did you choose to study psychology in the first place, right? I think like many of the guests recently on the show, they kind of have a similarity, which is studying psychology. So tell me a little bit about that. What started the curiosity in studying psychology in the first place?
Okay, so this is actually a very interesting question because psychology has never really been something I considered something to study for me. And it started when I was picking my A-levels subjects, and I was having a discussion with my mom, like, what do you think about if I took this subject, if I took that subject? And then she was suggesting, why not try psychology? It sounds interesting. So I decided to try psychology. My mom was very liberating, so she allowed me to take anything I wanted. So it was just a very casual chat. So I decided to take psychology as one of the subjects, and I actually really liked it. And out of all of the subjects I took, economics and psychology were the two subjects that I liked the best. And that was a time when I was thinking, maybe psychology could be one of the things I did.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of like how my journey started with psychology.
Right. It's pretty interesting because obviously we talk about the Asian stereotype where you either be a doctor or a lawyer. There's nothing in between sometimes. So it's really encouraging to hear that your mother herself, she was actually encouraging you to take psychology as well. So throughout the years, psychology, I mean, typically a degree will take you about 4 years, and a lot of times we were faced with the question around like do we want to be a mental health professional or not, right? So what are some of the things that you've learned over time and perhaps shape what you think about your future as well, right? Because I see that when you are studying, you tried out so many different things, right? So why didn't you choose to become a mental health professional in the end?
Okay, so the first thing is my psychology degree was 3 years because I didn't take masters, so it was 3 years long. And I actually did have that period in time during my degree where I was thinking, what if I studied masters? Like at one point I was very sure that I was going to take masters, even though I wasn't sure what masters is going to be.
Right.
But IO Psych, industrial organizational psychology, was very high on my list. So that was one of the main things I was considering because I was really into studying people at that point, even though I didn't know what it was, and I found out later it's consumer psychology. I was very into studying like what makes people tick.
Right.
And at the time, because I had very limited understanding of psychology, I thought maybe that's IO psychology. So at one point I was like studying intensively into researching into IO psych and understanding. Okay, so like what can I study here? Yeah. So IO psych was actually very high on my list back then.
So we came from the same university, right?
Yeah.
I graduated way earlier, not to date myself. But what was in industrial psychology, the subject, I remember the subject very clearly where they pair you up ran with random teammates in the course, and the team sizes were, at least for my time, we were paired with like 15 random individuals to kind of work it out on an assignment, and there were actually no textbook at that point of time. So I can't remember was there a textbook, but you were asked to work on a kind of like a learning and a development kind of project, right? Is it still the same, or what was interesting about that subject for you?
Okay, I think it's different.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what was the project that you worked on.
Yeah.
But during my time, they didn't actually call it IO site. If not mistaken, they call it human factors. So that was the closest thing.
Oh, I see. Right.
Yeah. So we were still working in groups, but if not mistaken, it was a group of 5.
Right.
So we were working together, to understand like what makes people click on this button and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
So
right.
that was the closest thing that we had to IO psychology.
Right, that makes sense. Back then, I think Facebook was at its infancy, so clicking on a button definitely makes sense at that point of time. But looking back at your experiences leading up to kind of co-founding WECT, right? It seems like you were really dabbling into like really just starting up things, right? I think one of the experiences that I saw was really IQ International, and it was, I think, just after that you were also you already started to dabble into co-founding WECT, right? So can you tell us a little bit about how that experience with IQ actually shaped you towards in the entrepreneurship journey, right? Is it related at all?
Okay, so my experience with iCube was actually very timely, I would say, because that was a time when I just enrolled into university and I heard about this UK organization that's primarily Malaysian students. They wanted to expand their organization into Malaysia. And that was an organization about everything entrepreneurship, everything startups. So it was a bunch of very passionate students. So I came across this opportunity and I thought, okay, why not? This sounds very interesting. So that's when I decided to join them. And we managed to do a lot of interesting things. And I think one of my most memorable ones was meeting up with a few of the founding members and deciding, okay, like how do we even register this as a business? Wow. And we had to go to the office to get it registered, go to the bank to get our bank set up. So that was one of the most memorable things I remember, and it was a very fun experience because that was the first time I had this opportunity to think, okay, how do I start something from scratch? Like, what are the SOPs that I need to lay down? Because my role at the time was marketing and outreach director, and I did not know anything about marketing other than having some very basic designing skills, because I really enjoyed designing back in my high school days. So other than that, I didn't really know much about marketing, so everything had to start from scratch. We had to basically, me and another guy, the two of us, we had to figure out, okay, how do we run events? Like, how do we run campaigns? And what's going to be the SOPs? What's going to be the deliverables? How's the deadline going to be looking like? And how are we going to attract people? So all of this. And how do we build an Instagram page from scratch? Because we had to have one that was only for Malaysians, only for the Malaysia branch. So that was the first time we started doing these things as well. Yeah. Right.
And, being... I think this is probably during, before your 20s or maybe early 20s, right? What was it like going to the bank and say like, hey, I want to open a business account and all that, right? Who do you go and ask for advice at that point of time?
I think we primarily just relied on the internet.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, we just researched, and it was me and the two, what do you call them? The presidents, the president and vice president. So it was the two of them and me. We the three of us went together, and we were just figuring out, okay, so like maybe we can talk to that person, because we roughly know the process from researching through the internet. So we just spoke to the person at the counter, and we just got it done. They were very helpful as well. So it was a scary but refreshing experience. Right.
Yeah. Were you taken seriously? Because like, up until today, right, I kid you not, like because I people told me that I look young, and I am still I am still mistaken as the intern sometimes. And there are advantages and disadvantages to that. The disadvantage to that is that sometimes people don't take you seriously because you just because you look young, right? So when you were running the IQ International, were there any experiences where just because you guys like a young bunch and you weren't taken seriously, and how do you kind of overcome those kind of challenges?
Actually, no, not really. In fact, being young was kind of our primary advantage.
Wow. Yeah.
Because IQ was actively, reaching out to, still is actively reaching out to a lot of companies and asking for sponsorship, asking for them to, come to our events as a speaker.
Yeah.
So we do this on a very regular basis, and having that student identity helps it a lot more because people are more open to listening to what you have to say. And the entrepreneurs or like the people that reach out to, they are more keen to share with us because, they see us as,
you're learning and
you're learning
and
and
share back, right?
You're also kind of like the future. So they are very open to help. Yeah, so I actually found being young was an advantage.
Wow.
In this case, yeah.
Yeah, that's very encouraging. I think I really like speaking to young people simply because, the amount of energy that they have and I guess the aspiration that they have, right? They're not, I guess, dampened by the cynicism of, time and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I
right?
think one more thing is also because people are very forgiving when you're a student and making mistakes. So it's different from the working world where people expect you to, okay, you say this, you're going to deliver this. But as a student, if you kind of like mess up a little bit, people will still understand it and they'll give you an opportunity.
Talking about that, right? Do you have I guess some mistakes that you've made during those time that were, I guess, looking back, it was it was interesting, or perhaps it's amusing, that taught you something, I guess, that's useful later.
Okay, mistakes I made.
Yeah. If there's none, that's fine too. I mean, like you're
sure
a high. I read your profile. You're definitely a high achiever for sure.
I mean, there was a lot. It's just that it was a while back, so it's taking some time to recall. I think one of them is we didn't really know much about marketing, to be honest. We were just winging it, and our perception of marketing back then was, great design, catchy tagline, and the signups will just automatically roll in whatever event it is. But obviously that wasn't the case, and we did have some events where we really struggled to get enough participants, and then we would have meetings about like, why did this happen? What can we change in the future? So I think that was one of the eye-opening things that I learned, and I came to really love marketing. That it's not really just the visuals, just like what you say, but it's also like how you position it, how you attract people. This kind of stuff. That's one of the first things that hit me hard as the so-called marketing director at the time.
Right. So it's not just about setting up the Instagram page and and nice visuals
Far
and that's
from
it,
that,
right? Far from that, right? So it sounds like that is actually a pivotal moment for you to actually, I guess, the foundation on why you wanted to start WECT in the first place, right? Tell me a little bit about your journey towards building WECT as well, right? What did you initially thought it was? How did it start in the first place?
Okay, so fun fact about WECT is it didn't actually start off as WECT, because when I started WECT with my co-founder Ashwin, it was actually back when we were still students. I was starting year 2, he was starting year 3, and this was during the pandemic, and we were thinking like, okay, we're just stuck at home. He's in the UK, I'm in Malaysia. Like, what can we do? So we're thinking of, okay, you know what? I have some design skills, I have some copywriting skills, and he has some video editing skills. So why not we do something out of this? So we started like establishing this small freelance business, which was called Ashwin and Lizzie Designs back then. Very, very primal. And then we started, reaching out to people online and asking them, hey, do you need this kind of service? So we would like drop by Facebook groups and stuff like that. So we did get a few clients, and we tried our best to give the best service so they would keep coming back. And there was this one particular client who just came to us and said, I really like the work that you guys are doing, and I'm actually looking for someone to build my personal brand for me on LinkedIn. So those were two big words. That was my first time hearing at the time, personal branding LinkedIn. And LinkedIn. And Ashwin, he's always been a very spontaneous person and very adventurous. He's like, oh my God, let's do this. It sounds fun. And I was the one who's always been very timid. And I would rather stay in my comfort zone. And this sounded like too much of an adventure for me. So, but in the end, we did decide to proceed with it, and under the condition that he's gonna lead me, because I wasn't sure what I was doing at the time. So, and he had a lot more leadership positions even back in high school. So he was a little bit more confident than me. So he was like, okay, I can lead you. Then we started this thing, and that's when we rebranded to Kaya Studio. So this was the second phase. The second iteration, version 2. Yes. So that's when we became Kaya Studio, and part of the reason. How do you spell that? Is it Kaya? Yeah, it is. Right. So at that time, because we started serving this client, and he was really happy with like the service and the results, so he started referring a few more people, all looking for the same thing.
Right.
That's when we had to, go into Kaya's studio. And as we started growing there, we started learning more and more things about LinkedIn, about personal branding. And we felt that, okay, so Kaya Studio is probably not going to be the best thing, moving forward as we want to scale, as we want to do this on a full-time basis, even after we graduate.
Yeah.
So then we repackaged a lot of our services, we repackaged a lot of our positioning, our branding, and that's when we came out as WECT.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of like dissect a few things, a little bit of what you mentioned, right? I think maybe if we kind of go back to the initial part where you talk about like, you just decided to kind of come up with this whole freelance thing, and you wanted to go to look for clients, right? Where do you go and look, and how do you know that, hey, maybe we should go and try and look for this like Facebook groups and stuff like that, right? Because you are just starting off. The inspiration or maybe the ideas, besides obviously searching on Google, there must be some, I guess, thought process behind like maybe we should start here, right? So tell us a little bit more about that, right?
It actually started with an event that Ashvin was attending at the time. And it was an event that was related to Gary Vee. I think he's one of the key speakers during the conference. So after the event, he came to me and said, hey, I want to create a carousel about this. And between the two of us, I'm the one who is a little bit more well-versed in design. So we worked on this together. And then he just posted it on the Facebook group chat.
I see.
For the conference.
For the conference. Okay, right.
So he was basically he captioned it something like, "Oh, this is just me sharing my takeaways from Gary Vee's insightful sharing," and it took off. It took off within the group.
Nice.
And a lot of people started reaching out to ask, like, "Oh, do you do this? Like, do you do carousels? And can I, like, get you to do it for me?" Yeah, that's how it started.
Wow.
And then from there onwards, how we got clients was primarily just trying to do our best in our service and then ask for referrals, and that works very well for us as well.
I see.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I'm trying to really just read as broad as possible and try to discover during my career break to do different things, right? One of the things I realized, the freelancers, or I guess like people who sell their services, one of the biggest challenges is always about pricing themselves. As you started off, how do you know how to price yourself, and to make sure that you're not, I guess, taken advantage of, but at the same time, hey, you want business, right? As you start off. So how did you learn about that? What are some of your learnings from that?
Okay, so for this one, it's a little bit tricky because we didn't know as well, and we tried to do research. The first thing you do is just go to Google, search like how do people charge. So when we started off, we would usually charge the lowest of the range.
Right.
And then we try to do our best. We try to give even more than what we promised.
Okay.
And of course that made clients happy. Then we started increasing a little bit from there. So that was how we initially started on. Then as we progress a little bit, so this one I need to credit Ashvin here because he's the one who has a more logical brain from his engineering background. So he would come up with this Excel sheet and say, okay, so these are the services we're gonna offer, and here's all the cost breakdowns. How can we reduce the cost as much as possible for clients, and here's the steps to reduce it. And okay, on top of this, we need probably like a 30 to 40% margin. And that's how we kind of started pricing things. Just by making it very logical, very detailed.
There's a basis behind your pricing and stuff like that. You touched on something like, initially when you wanted to kind of basically give the bang for the buck for clients and the best service, over deliver. And then you started to charge a little bit more. In my experience, when we're charging clients, right, the moment they're used to a certain price, it's always very hard to increase the price. It is. Right. So like for recurring clients, right, was the conversation to kind of get a higher price from them, was it difficult at all and stuff like that?
I think it's difficult for some clients who we struggle to get results with, and that's understandable because we just started and we were experimenting a lot of things. So for those clients, we tended, not to raise prices, or we would talk to them and they would just feel like, oh, okay, maybe this is not the best investment for me right now. But for clients that we managed to get results, they're actually very keen to do that, especially if you let them know that. I think something that worked very well for us was we tended to give more value first. So sometimes we would do things that are actually a little bit over the budget that they set, but we will still do it for them. And once they're happy and they see results, then we tell them that, hey, if you're keen to do this on a more recurring basis, then maybe you can revise a little bit on the pricing. So that's when they're more willing to say yes.
Got it. And to move on a little bit, fast forward a little bit, I guess the second birth of of this business, before it became WECT, was really talking about like personal branding and LinkedIn, right? For those of us who, just like you back then, were not familiar with it, right? Can you tell me a little bit about that? Is it because like personal branding can come off as very show-offy, right?
Yes.
And it's like, oh, these people has their own website and stuff like that. So the vanity level is just like too high, that kind of stuff. So tell us a little bit about that, right? But personal branding, what it is, what kind of clients actually would want personal branding, right?
Okay, I think the first thing about personal branding is like what you said, a lot of misconception towards what personal branding really is. When people think personal branding, they think about, oh, this person is, showing off the achievements, just talking about themselves, and want all the attention on themselves. That's the general perception of personal branding, I would say, in Southeast Asia or Asia in general. But that's really not the case. Personal branding is especially important, I would say, for founders or generally any career builders at all, because what you're essentially doing with personal branding is not talking about yourself. You're actually trying to build a community. So it's all about the audience that you're trying to build. So what kind of value they can give to them, what kind of experience you can share with them, or knowledge, and in a sense you empower them. And help them see that, hey, this person is very similar to me. Like, for example, your podcast talking about psychology, like it helps you to pull in people who also are passionate in psychology or are passionate in psychology but are pursuing something else. Yeah, so it helps you to build that community because people see that, hey, I can relate to this person. And that's really what personal branding is about. And in terms of why people should be doing personal branding, there's a lot of reasons. Like for career builders, it's because it showcases like what you're capable of. Number one, your credibility, and that you are a trusted leader in your industry, whatever it is. And then for founders, it actually generates a lot of trust towards your company brand.
Right.
And this is also one of the key things we're working with founders, because the consumers are changing how they are behaving on social media. And one of the biggest way is they're actually looking to join communities.
Right.
And I think you can see that from social media, where people are always, they're always gathering under comments. And there's a huge community under all of the comments.
Right.
But the thing with company brands is that it's very difficult to build that kind of community, because you have a professional front, you have a whole team managing, and what comes out is just, this is just a company brand. It's lifeless, it's soulless, and people cannot relate to it,
right.
Which is why some company brands are trying to mimic human tones with them. Like, for example, Wendy's. I think you've seen some of the tweets from Wendy's.
Right.
It's always very personal. And
like
those
GSC in Malaysia, they tried. They work really well, right? It's basically like they talk like your very sassy friend that is trying to reply to your comments.
The hello
right?
cannot, for example. So those kind of personalities, like brand personalities, really help. And that's also why personal branding for founders or even for employees within the same company really helps, because it shows people that, okay, this person advocates for this mission or this cause that they're trying to build. And this person talks about this kind of cause, and it invites people to join your community. So that's essentially what personal branding is about. So it's actually not so much on sharing your achievements.
Right.
And I understand that on LinkedIn it can come across that way, because LinkedIn has always have this feeling of like
the highlight reel, right?
humble bragging.
Yeah.
Like,
it's like Instagram version, which is a highlight reel of our life. Whereas LinkedIn is a highlight reel of your career.
Yeah. Of all the wins in your career. Only the wins.
Yeah. So, it's true. This jogged my memory. You talk about brand personality and stuff like that. I suddenly remember that actually my thesis for my final year was actually on brand personality.
Oh wow, interesting.
And how it actually encourages and which, if you have a brand personality versus if you don't, does it invite more interaction, right? The different types of brand personality, is there a type? And I think that was pretty interesting. But I also remember that back then it was really hard, because I was literally scanning through Facebook pages, different brands and stuff like that, to really just analyze the comments, how many comments they have and stuff like that. It was quite manual and tedious back then. Yeah. So the in terms of fast forward, you see Kaya Studio has kind of served its purpose, right? And it's probably not feasible when you're gonna scale up. What do you mean by that? Like, why do you need to rebrand yourself into a different brand name? Because it's from an outside in perspective, it sounds like you're basically maybe changing your focus, or maybe like perhaps just trying to change the way you deliver your service. why is there a need to kind of change it into WECT, and what has changed from Kaya to WECT, for example?
Okay, I think one of the key things we realized as well as we started getting more and more of these personal branding clients is that the whole brand that we built for Kaya Studio is very different, because at that time we were still expecting a lot of like designing work to come in, designing projects to come in, and the whole logo, the whole branding is very much on like looking very sophisticated and stuff like that. So when we started to narrow down our focus to only doing personal branding for LinkedIn, we realized that actually this stuff is a lot about testing the market, testing like what your audience really likes, and being very bold. Like you have to dare to like take a stance on LinkedIn and not just, you know, post things that everyone will agree with, because that's essentially what building a personal brand is about. Like you have to build a real community, and that comes from when you're willing to, you know, challenge the status quo and stuff like that. So we needed a brand that was very bold, very
hence the name.
hence the name,
just WECT.
Just WECT. And a lot of experimentations as well. So just WECT.
Wow. Okay. Right. So, you know, I think you know, like one of the reasons why I kind of brought up, you know, one of what I did for my thesis is around brand personality, and we have a chat off camera as well in terms of, I guess, our interests in psychology, and, you know, just weaving these different threads all together, right? Is really around, like, you know, how do you actually apply you know, psychology in the day-to-day, right? In your future career. I think that's something that's really interesting. So you're now a co-founder and a CEO of a marketing agency, and your creativity is definitely going to be something, right? Because you need to be able to kind of think of different ways to experiment. You know, how did your background in psychology maybe help, you know, shape your approach when you advise your clients and things like that, right?
Okay, this is actually a very interesting question, because I do get this question from some of my friends as well from time to time. They will ask me like, how do you actually apply psychology? Because, you know, like everything we learned was so theory based, not sure how it's going to be relevant in real life. And this is something I realized took a lot of observation and a lot of self-studying. I would say it's also because I'm personally very interested into, like, you know, really understanding what makes people take action, what makes people want to click that button. So I spent a lot of time into studying, into researching about this stuff, and over time I realized a lot of common patterns started popping up. Like people would talk about like this psychology effect that I actually learned in my degree. But back then I didn't really know how it could be applied. But now there's a real example here of how people used it in the marketing scene. So that's kind of like how I started building from there. And I think that's how I built it. And also the fact that also when I first started, I knew that what I wanted to do was something to do with this, something to do with like the study of humans, but there wasn't a very clear subject that teaches people about, you know, how do you apply this, at least in my university. And a lot of it came from me just observing. I would say. Right.
You know, what are some of the concepts that you probably observed and you say that, hey, this was actually what I studied in psychology, right? So I think I give you one example, right? I realized that, you know, Instagram's algorithm, right? You know, it's probably based on what kind of videos or you know, content you interact with, and they serve you, you know, targeted ads, right? Okay, so that's all fine. We all know that. Let's say, like, for example, because, you know, we're trying to learn to be a parent, and therefore, you know, I watch a lot of you know, short videos on parenting and stuff like that. They will show me toys, right? And then I realized what worked, why I bought what I bought, or why I looked what I looked, was because the ad was shown to me time and time again. And we know this is called mere exposure effect.
Yeah, it is.
Right? What mere exposure effect taught us was really that the likelihood or probability of you liking a thing or generate a positive impression is simply just by repeating the exposure to a particular thing or even person, right? Which is the most fascinating thing. So if you want to really like create a positive impression, you just need to appear in front of that person multiple times, right? So I realized that I'm starting to buy things just because, you know, or I realized I'm like, oh, maybe I want to buy it simply because, right, the ads were shown to me over and over and over again. I'm like, then I start to think about it again and again and again, right? So are there any examples that you observe later on, like maybe certain concepts is like, so this is what it was, you know?
Okay. One thing I observed is probably the cognitive dissonance.
Right.
Yeah, and this is something that we sometimes use in our work as well.
Mm.
So basically what cognitive dissonance is that someone tells you something.
Yeah.
And if how do I say this? If let's say someone asks you for a favor.
Yeah.
And you have two options now. You have the option to say yes or to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And cognitive dissonance is basically saying that people cannot, our brains cannot really compute it when, you know, someone is asking us for a favor, but we say yes and we still don't like the person.
Mm-hmm.
So basically cognitive dissonance is saying if someone's asking you for a favor and you decided to say yes, you like the person more because your brain will think that I said yes, therefore I have to like the person. Yeah.
Right.
So we do use this in our work as well. Like in the past, we helped some of our clients to reach out to people on LinkedIn, like some form of outreach.
Yeah.
And we will apply this similar principle as well into the DMs that we write, the scripts that we write. Basically asking them for a favor, a simple favor. Sometimes it's something that's very easy, very effortless for them to do, just to get them to say yes. And once they say yes, then the relationship starts building from there. So it also overlaps a little bit with the foot in the door technique.
Right.
Yeah. So these are like small ways of how we use it.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting because I think cognitive dissonance is something that even if you are aware, it's tough to combat because, you know, it's designed it's designed to protect you, right? It's designed to also help you make sense of, I guess, the decisions that you make and things like that, right? Yeah. So that's really interesting. I think you know, it definitely sounded like you've learned a lot, you know, throughout, you know, so many years. I guess maybe one of the things that, you know, I'm quite curious to understand from you is really that, you know, the advice has always been just start, just do it, right? It sounds really simple, but, you know, you tell us a story of how you decided that, you know what, maybe there's a client that you really wanted to target or things like that, a client that you really wanted to, you know, how do you really just decide that I'm just gonna just reach out to this person, right? Is there a story that you can remember that is most memorable to like really just go there and just get this person, right?
Okay, I think there were a few instances, and it's true that, like, you know, there's this fear of like, oh, what if I'm not good enough? You know, imposter syndrome. Like, should I even reach out to this person? Maybe this person is like beyond what my current standards can offer. But what I realized over time is a lot of times these things are really just in our heads. And I think with personal branding, we are in a very niche market because personal branding is just starting to become a popular thing. So in terms of offering this as a service, there's not many people who do this. And often when I speak to co-founders, when I meet them, founders or co-founders in general, the common sentiment is that, hey, this is actually something really interesting. This is something I should probably explore, or I should probably hire someone to do as well. So a lot of times it's really just about, you know, taking that first step to speak to someone and just sharing your perspective. And you might see that people start opening up. Sometimes people might shut down your ideas and say that, I don't think this is something relevant to me. And that's okay. That just means that they're not the audience you're trying to serve. So it's really just about, you know, not overthinking and just it's really just start doing it. Yeah, then when you start doing it, you realize that all of the thoughts were just in your head. It's not actually real. Yeah. Right.
Got it. And, you know, fast forward to today, were there already things that, you know, you wish that you have done differently, you know, versus when you just started out? What are some of those things that you wish you have done differently that, you know, could have perhaps have a profound impact of how you carry out your business today?
I wish I would have done differently. You know, one thing I wish I would have done differently is speaking up more. Because when I started building up a team, there were a few instances where, like, I could feel like, okay, this is the strategy that the team has agreed to go with, but I have a gut feeling that it might not work. But I think at that point, because I was very fresh in the scene as well, I would think that, okay, maybe we should try this. We should, like, you know, I should validate my team's opinions and just go with it. But I realized a lot of times when I reflect on it, I actually had a similar experience. That's why I had a gut feeling that this might not work. I had experience where I did something similar or where I tried something different and it worked or it didn't. So that kind of like became a subconscious thing that told me that, okay, maybe we shouldn't do this. But I didn't really speak up because I wanted to give the team an opportunity. I also wanted to, like see if this goes well. And what I realized later on is that sometimes this behavior for me tended to like slow things down. We would like test things and, it doesn't work, then we go back to the thinking. Then only I would say, what about we try this instead? But I could have said it from the start. So that's something I realized along the way that, okay, if I have a bad gut feeling, I should communicate this, even if it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to execute whatever I have in mind, but it's just that, just putting it out there that maybe there's this thing that we haven't considered as well, or like this concern that we should explore before we go into this.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy, because at the end of the day, when you're building up a team, you don't want to risk the team thinking that you're just asking my opinion for the sake of asking my opinion, right? But at the same time, obviously you have experiences to share, so it's really like finding that balance around like providing information and data point for the team to consider. And like sometimes you just gotta tell them that, hey, perhaps let's try this first. If it doesn't work, right, let's try a different way, right? So I think that's really tricky as leaders, building up a team. That's really hard to do.
I think like learning how to communicate as well with the team is also something that's quite important, because I tended to put a lot of emphasis on like how to communicate with clients. Because like clients are the primary stakeholders, and we need to like be able to work effectively with them. So I put a lot of attention into that, but I didn't put as much into like, okay, how can I effectively communicate with the team? How can I make sure the team morale is high? How can I make sure that they feel comfortable in this environment? So that's something I learned along the way as well, that communication with different people requires different skills.
Right.
Yeah, and that's something that I wish I would have, started learning earlier as well.
Yeah. I mean, like, hey, obviously I'm in terms of time wise, I'm a little bit further along.
Yeah, definitely.
So I wish that I've learned that lesson earlier, and you have a lot more future than a lot of people, right? So I think it's really, really great that you've already realized this just 3 years into your journey. I think that's fantastic, right? I think the one of the things that I've learned across time leading teams is really that being able to actually create a psychologically safe space is something that it's critical, because at the end of the day, we're working under high demands, and we spend so much time at work with each other, right? So being able to actually foster that collaborative environment is better for everybody, right? So it's a win-win for businesses, it's win-win for your own well-being and also your team's well-being as well, right?
Yeah, actually this is probably a good time for me to ask you.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah, like how did you apply psychology in your work? Like, was it very relevant for you? Or was it something that you have to actively see whether there's ways to apply in your work?
Right. Yeah, I think the one of the things I realized was, I mean, at least in the beginning of my career when I was in HR, it wasn't immediate, because I think I wasn't as passionate in like developmental psychology or learning psychology back then, right? So and my first role was actually in as a learning and development specialist. So it was a bit difficult. But later on in my career in Accenture and also in Thoughtful, for example, there were different instances where I realized that it's actually quite immediate in a sense, right? Wasn't a subject that we learn immediately, but around areas like change management and gamification, for example, these are things that are psychological concepts that are, I guess, more direct in that sense, right? So I think in the area of change management, for example, being able to actually understand the different factors that would allow people to change or not change, right? I think the very important factor is to realize that actually, in general, the first response, for majority of the people, is actually resistance, right? So to be able to find a path of least resistance, what would that look like? I study different concepts around, in order for people to have confidence in changing, right? What would that look like, right? The modality of changes and things like that are something that I realized that it were quite applicable. I think gamification is something that I'm quite fascinated in terms of applying different gaming concepts, right? Like, for example, like games are very good at making you feel good about achieving something, right? Leveling up, gaining experience points and things like that. So it may not happen in real life, but you can actually tell people like, congratulations, you are so much better at XYZ now, right? There's a reason why LinkedIn, we talk about LinkedIn, right? Has that status bar of telling you like, hey, you're an all-star profile now versus a beginner profile, right? What is that doing, right?
Even likes itself is a validation.
Yeah, precisely, right? So those are like really just very instantaneous concepts that I've applied in my work, back in Thoughtful and also in Accenture as well, right? So I think those things are still very relevant. I think that's why I continue to kind of really look into having conversations with people like you and also different people to kind of see what are the areas that we can actually apply psychological concepts to our advantage as well, right? So not so much about scheming, but it's really just really understanding where the other person is coming from, right? And to be able to, I guess, put our point across, to be more persuasive in what we do, right? So thanks for asking that question. On the topic of like really just well-being and psychological safety and really just psychology in general. I also realized that you were actually an intern in one of our startup I guess counterpart Naluri as well. They also talk about health and wellness and things like that. Being in your role, right? I was in a startup as well, and you're starting up a business. How do you actually then take care of yourself and your team as well, right? Because I'm sure the work is demanding and you're faced with different pressures altogether.
Okay, so in terms of like taking care of myself, something that I find very effective for me is like before bedtime I need to have at least 1 hour to myself, and this is the time where I recharge, and it could be me doing anything. It could even be me doing work if I felt like it that day. But other than work, there are also things like watching shows, watching something educational on YouTube, reading books, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. Sometimes I text my friends or just have a video chat. It would be whatever I feel like doing at that moment, but this 1 hour is time for me only. And I have total control of how I want to spend it. So I find this very effective for me to recharge. And if I had a particularly tough day, I might lean towards activities that are more entertainment, like listening to music or playing the guitar. But if I had, I would say like, if I spend my day doing a little bit more like admin mindless tasks, then I would challenge myself a little bit more before I sleep, because I want to feel that I achieve something productive. Then I might do a little bit more work. So having that 1 hour to recharge and treating it as an outlet to let myself like release all of the stress, that really helps for me.
Right. It sounds like you're the kind that wanted to do something that may not, even if it's work related, something that is a little bit light on the cognitive load, a little bit more repetitive, a little bit more like you can feel like you've accomplished quite a few things. I find that there are certain times where just washing and listening to podcasts at the same time, different shows, whatever it is, that's quite therapeutic, even though that you're literally just washing stuff. I think that 1 hour is interesting, right? That sacred 1 hour.
How do you do it though?
I think that life hits you quite hard, and suddenly sometimes, right? So I have a 10-month-old, as I've told you. I think what I've been able to that has enabled me to do, whether it's a choice or not, because it's not like you can undo the whole situation, right? I'm very grateful that having a child meant that there's some form of routine, because routine is important for the development, right? And that helped myself to build a routine that I can get a rhythm on, and I'm very grateful for that, because after work and stuff like that, it meant that it is time to be present with him. It is meant to be time to read books to him. It meant that it's time to kind of shower him and all that, right? Even though yes, it is very tiring, but that moment to be to remind yourself to be present, it's a form of actually being able to feel fulfilled in life for me at this juncture. So I think that's really interesting how that has taught me to be really present, and be really just be grateful of the things that is in front of you, right? So I think that has helped me to kind of gain that balance, right? So I think if I were to really just dissect to the core of it, is just being present and being grateful to the things that you have and the time that you have. That has helped me to kind of keep a balance as well. I think there is also one thing that I've tried to do as much as I can is really be really conscious of the time that you clock off. And recently I've listened to another episode. I'm not sure whether it was the Knowledge Project or Tim Ferriss's show, where he started to say that the guest on the show was talking about how you need to be professional with your work, because what that basically meant, that if you're a professional, you know that there is a certain clock in, clock out kind of routine, and then your boundaries are a little bit more clearer. If not, your default mode is working, and it's gonna burn you out because it's not sustainable, right? So being able to actually maintain some semblance of that will be helpful, because you're being a professional. A professional meant that you show up, you do your work, and after that you continue to do other things, right? So I think being professional at your work is something that is something strangely familiar but also profound at the same time, to kind of protect your time.
Yeah. I think it's important to highlight that for everyone, that professional clock in, clock out hours could look different, because I think this comes back to work-life balance.
Yes.
And for everyone, balance is different. For some, balance could mean like working 10 hours a day. For some, balance could mean working just clocking out at 8 hours. And personally, for me as a starting founder as well, I find that it's very hard when I try to uphold the standard of like clock in, clock out 8 hours a day.
Yeah, of course.
And I feel very guilty.
Yeah.
And I find it more well balanced for me when I have the flexibility of like certain days I work a little bit more, certain days I work a little bit less. So recognizing this is also very important.
Yeah, definitely. I think the key to what the guest was trying to say was really that regardless of what you think it is, but having the concept of really just clock out whichever time it is, then it needs to exist. It cannot be clock in and then there's no clock out.
That's true.
So if it's like, you have 24 hours a day and that day you have to clock in, 14 hours, 10 hours, just make sure that, there's a clock out, and don't clock out at the 23rd hour or 24th hour.
Yeah,
I think that's
definitely agree with that, because I had my fair share of burnouts.
Definitely, right. I think that's really important, to be able to kind of understand your priority. I think the funny part about the state of human being is really that, because health is something that I guess by default we have it, and then when you don't have it, that's where you start to do all these things, right? And then you're like, oh man, I need to take care of my health and stuff like that. But we need to recognize that as the cliche saying goes, preventive is better than cure, right? So in terms of the talking about being a founder and its challenges, and you're feeling guilty, it's definitely not easy being a founder. I think I've looked at so many different founders, and even in my previous organization, it's definitely not easy being a founder. But I guess the core question is really that for working so hard, right, what would success mean for you at this point, for yourself or for WECT, right?
Okay, so I think at this point, WECT is still at the stage where we're trying to figure out what's the best process, because we've been through like so many iterations, and also the fact that I've only been doing this full time for 1 year, so we're still figuring out a lot of things, building things up, building up the momentum. And at this point, the most important thing I would say for me to consider as successful is being able to work effectively with founders, because founders, as we've worked with them, we come to realize that they are very busy people. And a lot of times we need to fit ourselves into their schedules more than the other way around, which is understandable. So learning how to work with these founders and learning how to give an A-star service to them, while keeping in mind that they have these constraints and that, is one of the key things that we're trying to figure out right now. So at this point, I would say if we are able to fully smoothen the process, that would be considered a success.
As a success to you. Nice. And what are some of the milestones that you have, right? Perhaps for the short or long term, for maybe for yourself, or even for WECT, right?
I think in the longer term is to change the public's perception about personal branding, especially in the Southeast Asian region, because like we talked about it just now, people tend to perceive it negatively, and personal branding is definitely more than that, and it's actually beneficial for everyone who decides to, start building theirs, whether you're just a student or a career builder, someone who's early in your career, or even like a founder, or even someone who's retired. I've seen all of these profiles on LinkedIn, and I've seen all of them do very well. So there is a place for everyone in personal branding and on LinkedIn in general. And I hope that like with WECT, we're able to change that perception over time and get people to start seeing personal branding in a positive way. Because in the Western countries, it's already very developed, but here we're just slowly starting to warm up to it. So there's a lot of potential here.
Yeah. So what you're saying is really that, a future where even, if you think that you're just so-called, quote unquote, an average person that is climbing the corporate ladder, there is actually a reason why you should do personal branding.
I think it wouldn't be like because of that you should build, but it's like you should build regardless. Because I have seen quite a few corporate people who have built very strong personal brands, and it doesn't only help themselves, it also helps their company. Yeah, because it shows that you're passionate in the work that you do, even though you might not, be talking about your company, but you're just talking about the work that you do in your company. It adds like brownie points for your company as well. Yeah.
Do you have any, perhaps like, for people to help visualize what does that look like? Since we're talking about LinkedIn, some of these profiles are definitely going to be public, right? Do you have like maybe one name or two names that are maybe interesting profiles that you've seen for people to just take a look, right? What would that look like?
Okay, I think one of the most common profiles that we will see on LinkedIn is in HR scene. There's a lot of them. So if I were to name a few, I think HRC would be a good place to start. Like for example, Director, the founder of HireD.
Okay.
Yeah, he has some great content. So he talks about employers and employees, how to work with employees, and basically as an employer, how can you navigate as a founder and stuff like that. So he's one. And in terms of more general public content that people can relate to, probably Lingya. You personally know Lingya as well. So Lingya has started her
own podcast. For a
her
long
podcast,
time.
yes. Her LinkedIn, I think she started, early this year or sometime late last year, and she's doing fantastic. Yeah, so these two are good places to start. Malaysians, and you can totally relate to like the LinkedIn scene, how Malaysians are doing it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean I've seen some that has done really well in the sense that they tell stories that may not be directly related to the work that they do. It's really around what they're thinking of maybe Malaysia as a whole, right? The direction that is going in, or maybe even really just talking about how they are building their team together, the kind of I guess day to day that they have with their team, right? The challenges and the struggles that they have. So it's not like exactly like, hey, look at me, I've got this award. Look at my team, they've got this award. It's not always about that. I find those content more relatable.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be the work that you're doing. So it's more about like what kind of impact you want to create, and
what's the message you're trying to send?
What's the message you're trying to send? What feels like a mission that you want to do and accomplish in your lifetime, basically, and what do you want to be known for? Yeah, so based on these general directions, that's where you can start building your personal brand. So it doesn't have to just stick to like what you're currently doing. It could also be something that you want to build for the future.
Got it.
Yeah.
Right. I guess maybe as maybe the last few questions, right? I think one if you could give an advice that would depict like steps, right? The first few steps of starting their own career, venture, personal brand, whatever it may be. What would that look like? Like step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3, do that. I know that it's a very broad question. It's very vague. It really depends on the context because, in psychology, we always learn it depends. But generally speaking, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3, what are the first few things that, people should really just start considering, right? Or doing.
Okay, let me think. Okay. In terms of like 3 steps, I don't think I can have one right now.
I'm trying to give you a tough one by limiting it to 3, but you can give more than 3, of course.
Okay, so in terms of like the very first step,
yes,
I would say it's to whatever ideas that you have, like the idea that makes you want to start your entrepreneurship journey, share with people.
Okay.
And this is something that's very personal to me because when I first started Create Studio or WECT, the thought in my head was like, what if I share with people and people steal my idea?
Right.
It's a very rookie entrepreneur thing, I would say.
Okay.
And it's something that I struggled with quite a while. But over time, what I learned is that like if you don't share these ideas with people, you'll never get your ideas validated. Because that's the earliest form of an MVP.
Right.
Basically, just meeting up with people, just sharing your ideas, whether it's your friends, your family, or like even your existing colleagues, whoever it is, just share it with them and ask them, what do you think about this? Like, sure, they might be able to steal your idea, but the reality is that a lot of people are very busy. Most people are very busy, and they have a lot of things, a lot of commitments in their life. And even if they think this is a fantastic idea, they might not have the energy, they might not have the time to pursue it.
Yeah, all in the same level of passion as you do to actually action.
Yes,
on it, right?
and also the fact that whatever idea you have, somewhere across the globe, someone will already have it. So there's not really so much room for like a totally original idea.
Right.
It's just that who will execute it best, who can, rise up to the top. So don't be so fearful of sharing your ideas with people.
Right.
Just talk to people, get your ideas validated, get that feedback early on before you start making those mistakes and learn them the hard way.
Right.
And just start from there. I would say, that's
okay.
the most important thing.
Right. The first step. Okay, a little bit about that. Right. That's really good advice in terms of really just number one, don't be afraid of sharing your ideas because on the fear of people stealing it. Obviously on LinkedIn I saw that don't ask the VC to sign an NDA because they're not gonna bother, right? Because your idea is just an idea, right? But also like on the other side, right? They always say that people close to you are your biggest critic, and sometimes they are the people that you hope that would give you some validation and constructive criticism, and oftentimes they are the ones that will probably pull you down and make you feel very defeated, right? So as you share those ideas with these kind of people, what kind of perspective should you have, right? Because obviously it's not to say it's not to say like ignore all the negative thoughts, negative perception or criticism to your idea, but sometimes it can really get to you, right? So what kind of perspective should you have when you're actually sharing your idea with people?
Okay, I think deep down we all know that if I go to this person, what kind of feedback I'll be getting. Some people are I would say they are dream builders. Like when you go and talk to them, they'll be very cheerful, very uplifting, and you can do this and stuff like that. But there will be people you already know, these people exist, and they'll kind of like be the dream crushers. Right. You tell them and they're gonna be like, oh, that's not gonna work, this and that. I find that both are quite important because the dream builders, they tend to lift you up when you need it, but the dream crushers will be very realistic with you. What about this? What about that? This is not going to work because you don't consider this. So you kind of need both. So you need to understand from the get-go that what do you need at this point? Do you need people to validate your ideas? Then don't go to the dream crushers. So recognize who are the crushers, who are the builders.
Right. Got it. Right. So is there a step 2 after you have shared your ideas, you've recognized who the dream builders and the dream crushers?
Step 2.
Yeah.
I would say start with a very simple product, just an MVP. Whatever it is, whether you're trying to build an app or just trying to build a marketing agency, just start with a very simple product. Don't make it simple. That's also something that I personally struggle with because I would consider myself a bit of a perfectionist, and I want everything to be perfect before I launch it. But that's a huge mistake because you spend so much time on perfecting this, only to realize later that it's not gonna work. It's so much time wasted because there's a huge flaw that I didn't notice while I was busy, perfecting everything else. So just make sure that you have a product that has the most basic and most important function that it has to serve, and just launch it and then get feedback. Find the early adopters and just get feedback from there and see what works and what doesn't, then refine from there. Once you already have a product market fit, then only you start thinking about doing it nicely and perfecting everything else. Right. Yeah,
I can definitely relate to that. I think one of the things that as I was trying to experiment with this podcast, and why it took so many years just to record the first episode, was really around the fear of it not being good enough. Although so many years learning design thinking and stuff like that, there's always this statement that says if you're not embarrassed about your MVP,
Yeah,
you know,
that's
it is
true.
already too late, right? So I know all this thing in theory, but I still took many years to really just hit record. Even though I was on a career break, I got nothing better to do. I could have just hit record and just publish it, right? But really, it took a lot of really just like, you know, just really just drilling down that thought in your head. Then, you know, what's the worst that can happen, and, you know, just put it out there, keep it simple. That really helped me to really start, right? And, you know, keeping it simple, not to overwhelm myself, just to see how it goes and just, you know, learn along from it, right? So I can totally relate to that. You know, a couple more episodes in, I start to kind of like upgrade different parts of it, you
Yeah,
know,
I saw
just
that.
kind of like make it
Yeah.
make it a little bit more appealing and stuff like that, right? So, you know, really thank you so much for that advice. It's definitely very relatable as you know, I'm trying to really just
Yeah, I think you
start to
demonstrated that perfectly as well with the podcast.
yeah, thank you so much. I hope that, you know, we'll be able to really just experiment with more, you know, different concepts as well. It will be interesting to really just, I guess, continue to learn from you. I guess as a closing moment, you know, I wanted to really just really ask you about, you know, something pretty, I guess interesting in a sense. I mean, at least to me, is interesting. Is really that if you were to really just wanted to have a dream collaboration with someone, you know, who would it be and why, right?
Okay, this is a very interesting question.
Yeah.
A dream collaboration. Okay, I would say not a specific person, but a specific industry.
Sure.
And that would be PR.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
because
Why? Yeah.
what we notice as we, you know, work with more clients is that sometimes we have content that goes really viral for these clients, and PR agencies will start reaching out. Hey, like, we would like to interview you, and this becomes like a domino effect. When they get one PR opportunity, the PR agency refers them to another and another and another, and the clients love it.
Yeah.
So one thing that we're also exploring is like, how can we work with them? Like, how can we work with these PR agencies to, you know, just tell them that, hey, we have this great client story and you might find this relevant.
Right.
Yeah, so that's something we were thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. I think, right, in this day and age where, you know, this kind of like you know, relatable stories works better, in my opinion. I'm sure that the PR agencies are probably looking for relatable
Yeah, and
you
it's
know,
good for
stories
the
as well.
clients as well.
Definitely.
It's good for the founders.
Right. Well, it's been really interesting speaking to you, Lizzie. It's a really fun conversation that we had. You know, looking forward to see more of your successes and your stories on LinkedIn as well. So really, thank you so much for being on the show.
Likewise, thank you so much for inviting me, and I had a great conversation here. I learned a lot from you as well for psychology, and even during our offline conversation.
Thank you so much.
Previously, yeah.
So maybe as a last line, you know, if they want your services here, and, you know, maybe they want to have a chat with you, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn.
Yes.
So I'm always on LinkedIn. My name is Lizzie Tan, Lizzie, Lizzie Tan. Just search Lizzie Tan WECT and you should be able to find me.
Great. Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you
on the
so
show.
much.